Random House Audio presents The Life and Times of the Thunderbolt Kid, a memoir by Bill Bryson, read for you by the author. My kid days were pretty good ones, on the whole. My parents were patient and kind and approximately normal. They didn't chain me in the cellar. They didn't call me it. I was born a boy and allowed to stay that way. My mother, as you'll see, sent me to school once in capri pants, but otherwise there was little trauma in my upbringing. Growing up was easy. It required no thought or effort on my part. It was going to happen anyway. So what follows isn't terribly eventful, I'm afraid. And yet it was, by a very large margin, the most fearful, thrilling, interesting, instructive, eye-popping, lustful, eager, troubled, untroubled, confused, serene, and unnerving time of my life. Coincidentally, it was all those things for America, too. Everything recorded here is true and really happened, more or less, but nearly all the names and a few of the details have been changed in the hope of sparing embarrassment. A small part of the story originally appeared in somewhat different form in The New Yorker. Chapter 1, Hometown. Springfield, Illinois, Associated Press. The State Senate of Illinois yesterday disbanded its Committee on Efficiency and Economy for reasons of efficiency and economy. Des Moines Tribune, 6th of February, 1955. In the late 1950s, the Royal Canadian Air Force produced a booklet on isometrics, a form of exercise that enjoyed a short but devoted vogue with my father. The idea of isometrics was that you used any unyielding object, like a tree or wall, and pressed against it with all your might from various positions to tone and strengthen different groups of muscles. Since everybody already has access to trees and walls, you didn't need to invest in a lot of costly equipment, which I expect was what attracted my dad. What made it unfortunate in my father's case was that he would do his isometrics on airplanes. At some point in every flight, he would stroll back to the galley area or the space by the emergency exit, and taking up the posture of someone trying to budge a very heavy piece of machinery, he would begin to push with his back or shoulder against the outer wall of the plane, pausing occasionally to take deep breaths before returning with quiet, determined grunts to the task. Since it looked uncannily, if unfathomably, as if he were trying to force a hole in the side of the plane, this naturally drew attention. Businessmen in nearby seats would stare over the tops of their glasses. A stewardess would pop her head out of the galley and likewise stare, but with a certain hard caution, as if remembering some aspect of her training that she had not previously been called upon to implement. Seeing that he had observers, my father would straighten up, smile genially, and begin to outline the engaging principles behind isometrics. Then he would give a demonstration to an audience that swiftly consisted of no one. He seemed curiously incapable of feeling embarrassment in such situations, but that was all right, because I felt enough for both of us, indeed enough for us and all the other passengers, the airline and its employees, and the whole of whatever state we were flying over. Two things made these undertakings tolerable. The first was that back on solid ground, my dad wasn't half as foolish most of the time. The second was that the purpose of these trips was always to go to a major league city, stay in a big downtown hotel, and attend ball games. And that excused a great deal. Well, everything, in fact. My dad was a sports writer for the Des Moines Register, which in those days was one of the country's best papers, and often took me along on trips through the Midwest. Sometimes these were car trips to smaller places like Sioux City or Burlington, but at least once a summer we boarded a silvery plane, a huge event in those days, and lumbered through the summery skies up among the fleecy clouds to St. Louis or Chicago or Detroit to take in a homestand. It was a kind of working holiday for my dad. Baseball, like everything else, was part of a simpler world in those days, and I was allowed to go with him into the clubhouse and dugout and onto the field before games. I've had my hair tousled by Stan Musial. I've handed Willie Mays a ball that had skittered past him as he played catch. I have lent my binoculars to Harvey Keene, or possibly it was Billy Heft, so that he could scope some busty blonde in the upper deck. Once on a hot July afternoon, I sat in a nearly airless clubhouse under the left field grandstand at Wrigley Field beside Ernie Banks, the Cubs' great shortstop, as he autographed boxes of new white baseballs. which are, incidentally, the most pleasurably aromatic things on earth and worth spending time around anyway. Unbidden, I took it upon myself to sit beside him and pass him each new ball. This slowed the process considerably, but he gave a little smile each time and said thank you as if I had done him quite a favor. He was the nicest human being I've ever met. It was like being friends with God. I can't imagine there's ever been a more gratifying time or place to be alive than America in the 1950s. No country had ever known such prosperity. When the war ended, the United States had $26 billion worth of factories that hadn't existed before the war, $140 billion in savings and war bonds just waiting to be spent, no bomb damage, and practically no competition. All that American companies had to do was stop making tanks and battleships and start making Buicks and Frigidaires. And boy, did they. By 1951, when I came sliding down the chute, almost 90% of American families had refrigerators, and nearly three-quarters had washing machines, telephones, vacuum cleaners, and gas or electric stoves, things that most of the rest of the world could still only fantasize about. Americans owned 80% of the world's electrical goods, controlled two-thirds of the world's productive capacity, produced over 40% of its electricity, 60% of its oil, and 66% of its steel. The 5% of people on Earth who were Americans had more wealth than the other 95% combined. Remarkably, almost all this wealth was American-made. Of the 7.5 million new cars sold in America in 1954, for instance, 99.93% were made in America by Americans. We became the richest country in the world without needing the rest of the world. I don't know of anything that better conveys the happy bounty of the age than a photograph that ran in Life magazine 2 weeks before my birth. It shows the Chekalinsky family of Cleveland, Ohio, Steve, Stephanie, and two sons, Stephen and Henry, surrounded by the 2.5 tons of food that a typical blue-collar family ate in a year. Among the items they were shown with were 450 pounds of flour, 72 pounds of shortening, 56 pounds of butter, 31 chickens, 300 pounds of beef, 25 pounds of carp, 144 pounds of ham, 39 pounds of coffee, 690 pounds of potatoes, 698 quarts of milk, 131 dozen eggs, 180 loaves of bread, and 8.5 gallons of ice cream, all purchased on a budget of $25 a week. Mr. Chekalinsky made $1.96 an hour as a shipping clerk in a DuPont factory. In 1951, the average American ate 50% more than the average European. No wonder people were happy. Suddenly they were able to have things they had never dreamed of having, and they couldn't believe their luck. There was, too, a wonderful simplicity of desire. It was the last time that people would be thrilled to own a toaster or waffle iron. If you bought a major appliance, you invited the neighbors round to have a look at it. When I was about 4, my parents bought an Amana Stormore refrigerator, and for at least 6 months it was like an honored guest in our kitchen. I'm sure they'd have drawn it up to the table at dinner if it hadn't been so heavy. When visitors dropped by unexpectedly, my father would say, "Oh, Mary, is there any iced tea in the Amana?" Then to the guests he'd add significantly, "There usually is. It's a Stormore." "Oh, a Stormore," the male visitor would say, and raise his eyebrows in the manner of someone who appreciates quality cooling. We thought about getting a Stormore ourselves, but in the end we went for a Philco SureCool. Alice loved the Easy Glide vegetable drawer, and you can get a full quart of ice cream in the freezer box. That was a big selling point for Wendell Jr., as you can imagine. They'd all have a good laugh at that, and then sit around drinking iced tea and talking appliances for an hour or so. No human beings had ever been quite this happy before. People looked forward to the future, too, in ways they never would again. Soon, according to every magazine, we were going to have underwater cities off every coast, space colonies inside giant spheres of glass, atomic trains and airliners, personal jetpacks, a gyrocopter in every driveway, cars that turned into boats or even submarines, moving sidewalks to whisk us effortlessly to schools and offices, dome-roofed automobiles that drove themselves along sleek superhighways, allowing Mom, Dad, and the 2 boys, Chip and Bud or Skip and Scooter, to play a board game or wave to a neighbor in a passing gyrocopter, or just sit back and enjoy saying some of those splendid words that existed in the 50s and are no longer heard. Mimeograph, rotisserie, stenographer, icebox, dime store, rutabaga, Studebaker, panty raid, bobby socks, Sputnik, beatnik, canasta, cinerama, moose lodge, pinochle, daddy-o. For those who couldn't wait for underwater...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?